Whether you have an employment, criminal, family, corporate, or personal injury matter, legal issues can be puzzling. The lawyers at Devry, Smith & Frank make all the pieces fit together.
Welcome back to Real Estate 101. Today we're going to continue our discussion on employment law and talk a little bit about human rights claims. And I'm pleased to be joined once again by Marty of Devry, Smith & Frank, LLP. Marty, welcome back to the show.
Thanks for having me back, Joe.
All right, Marty, so what is a human rights claim?
Well, essentially, a human rights claim is an action brought by someone who believes that they've been discriminated against on the basis of one or more of the grounds that's been set out in human rights legislation. And in order for the Human Rights Tribunal in Ontario to have jurisdiction to deal with the claim, it would need to arise in the context of either employment, services, contracts, or vocational associations.
Okay, so what are some of these prohibited grounds of discrimination?
Well, there's a number of them. There are things like age, gender, sexual orientation, religion, place of origin, ethnicity. Essentially, they're personal characteristics of someone that can't be changed.
Okay, so which types of human rights claims are more common in the employment context?
The most common human rights claim that we see in the employment context is one for discrimination based on disability. Essentially, the employer has an obligation to accommodate any employees with an illness or a disability up to the point of undue hardship, but if the employer fails in that regard, that would lead to a discrimination claim on the part of the employee. Now, from time to time, we see discrimination cases based on age, based on race, or based on religion, but not quite as often, I would say, as the discrimination based on disability claims.
Okay, so let's say someone's human rights have been infringed. How and where do they make a claim?
In Ontario, the employee would need to go to the Human Rights Tribunal, and they would initiate the claim by filling out a form called an application, and by sending that or dropping that off with the tribunal. In the case of a claim that would need to be started at the federal body, which is called the Canadian Human Rights Commission, so for example, if there was a claim to be made against a federal employer, such as an airline or a telecommunications company, the best way to start that process is to call the commission, explain to them what the basis for your claim is, and then if the commission thinks that there's a possible claim, they will send you an application form, and you would then fill that out and return it to the commission. Okay,
so what are the steps in a human rights claim?
Well, in Ontario, you start off by filling out the application form, and then the party that you're saying has infringed your human rights has a chance to respond to those allegations. And then the original complainant has an opportunity to reply to any new allegations that were raised by the respondent. Now, after those documents have been submitted, if both parties agree, they can participate in mediation at the Human Rights Tribunal. And then if the case still hasn't settled, the parties would have a hearing in front of an adjudicator, and an adjudicator would decide the case based on the merits.
Okay, and how does the mediation process work?
Well, essentially, if both parties agree to mediate, the Ontario Human Rights Tribunal will provide a mediator to the parties free of charge. The mediation will take place at the Human Rights Tribunal, and the mediator will essentially spend up to 3 hours with the parties to try and resolve the case. And actually, a good way of thinking about how the mediation process works is you've got the two parties who are in separate rooms, so they've got their separate caucus, and the mediator is actually running back and forth between the two rooms, kind of like a real estate agent actually trying to broker a deal.
Right. Okay, so for viewers that don't know, what is mediation and arbitration?
The mediation arbitration process can arise actually the day of the hearing. So the day of the hearing at the Ontario Human Rights Tribunal, the adjudicator will usually give the parties one more opportunity to try mediation. And again, if both parties agree, the adjudicator will spend some time with the parties to try and mediate a resolution to the claim. However, the catch this time is that because we're on the day of the hearing, if the adjudicator is unable to assist the parties in resolving the dispute by mediation, that same adjudicator is now going to hear evidence. So it's going to hear all the evidence that the parties have and will ultimately decide the case on the merits. And it's called, that process is called mediation arbitration, because both the mediation and the arbitration would be done by the same person.
Okay, so what are some of the remedies that the tribunal can award?
There are a number of different remedies that the Human Rights Tribunal could award. The first is money to compensate the complainant for the breaches of the Human Rights Code that they have sustained. The tribunal could also award, in the case of the employment context, that an employee who has been discriminated against be reinstated to their employment. And another remedy that we see from time to time is the tribunal ordering that the offending party apologize to the complainant for the behavior that breached the Human Rights Code. So essentially, the tribunal can award any remedy that it sees fit that would essentially encourage or promote the offending party to comply with the Human Rights Code.
Okay, so what if a claimant can't afford a lawyer?
If a claimant can't afford a lawyer, I would highly encourage them to contact the Human Rights Legal Support Center to see if the center would be willing to take on their case free of charge.
Okay, Marty, any last tips for someone that thinks they may have a human rights claim?
Well, sometimes it can be difficult to know if you have a human rights claim, so it's important to speak to someone. And if you're in this situation, please feel free to call me at the number on your screen. I'd be happy to help.
All right, Marty, thanks for coming on today's show, and I'm looking forward to seeing you again in the future.
Thanks very much for having me, Joe.
So if you think you may have a human rights claim, get in contact with Marty Rabinovich at Devry Smith Frank, LLP. I'm your host, Joe Tricera. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you next time.